Welcome back, everybody, for a new and exciting horror podcast from your lovely host, Paul Doski, with also the lovely fiance, Tessa Baker.
Hello.
And then we also have here our guest, all the way from New York, too, that is with us until tomorrow. So, luckily, with this, she gets to be on this. Yay!
So she's our co-assistant co-host.
Yep, so co-assistant co-host, and we got Sheila.
See,
Pure
pure
gamer.
gamer.
There we go. Say hi.
Hello.
All right, and now, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Monkeyfun Studios, we got David. I have no idea how to say your last name, so
Don't worry, nobody gets it right. We'll say it's Kizzia this time.
Kizzia. And the Kizzia, 'cause that's what I'm kind of going with.
That's okay.
Okay, cool. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hopefully the gibberish of jabbering doesn't bother you. But all right. So David, this is the part where, even though I'm saying your name, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself for people like me and Tessa and Sheila here have an idea of who the hell you are.
Sure. So, again, my name's Dave. My company's called Monkeyfun Studios, and we put out what's called role-playing games. And role-playing games are much more than what they once were. When you say role-playing games, the first thing that, the big kid on the block, of course, is Dungeons and Dragons. And a lot of people have heard of that because it's become much more prevalent in the culture thanks to things like Stranger Things. A lot of celebrities, Twitch, demonstrate live action play sessions of Dungeons and Dragons very frequently. So we're kind of now in a role-playing renaissance. And so the games themselves have gone to multiple types of genres that just go beyond sword and sorcery types of games. And now you'll see things that are much more, you'll see more horror-based games, you'll see much more questions about identity, different types of time periods. It's a very exciting time right now for role-playing games, and not just because of the pop culture now starting to embrace it, but also because now independent publishers are able to be distributed and create their products and be able to get out to a much larger audience than we ever were before.
Nice.
Yeah, and actually, and I don't mean to get too insider baseball about it, but, right now it's a situation where before, 10 years down, 10 years before, you really had to be one of the big guys. You really had to make a big investment. Now it's a situation where if you've got a good idea, and you want to crowdfund it, Kickstarter or Indiegogo is available to be able to bring it to reality. You now have internet resources that allow you to be able to find people online, to be able to provide artwork, do editing for you. And now the technology's there to where you can do print on demand, so you can actually have people be able to order your product and to be able to have it printed based off of the order, so you don't have to have a whole bunch of surplus there in your garage or something like that. So for the smaller guys, it's a nice time to be involved or to get involved into role-playing publishing.
That is very handy. I just recently backed a tabletop RPG game not long ago called Forsaken Forest. I don't know if you heard of that. It was
Sure.
it was actually on Kickstarter as well. So, and I think they're doing the same thing that you're just talking about, the print on demand thing.
Yeah, and actually, I apologize, I'm pulling this totally out of the air, but for Kickstarter has said that their number one category for projects, if I remember correctly, are games. And not just for role-playing games, but also tabletop and card games and what have you. So it's something, it's something that's developing credence and respectability, as opposed to just saying, I'm asking for money so I can make potato salad. You know, it's beyond that now. It's now actually something where even some of the larger companies are wanting to get involved to be able to create a pre-order format for what they're doing.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. I've always seen like what is the one category that Kickstarter does? Projects we love. There's always
Yes.
role playing, comics, like everything there. So it's nice to see Kickstarter kind of push the projects like that too. Because I think Indiegogo does the same thing, but they do it differently. I believe.
Yeah. Just talking a little bit about it. So when it comes to Kickstarter and Indiegogo, Kickstarter is very specific about saying that it's an all or nothing proposition where you have to hit the target before it's actually backed and when the money is withdrawn from all of its backers. Indiegogo is more incremental to say that, okay, you may not have reached your target goal, but you will still receive the funds that was associated with it. And so it's a little bit different. You know, Kickstarter's much more, I don't want to say mainstream, but it's much more accepted and well known. So, it's whatever you particularly find for your taste. And actually, kind of pivoting back to Monkeyfun. So, we do several types of games. We've been doing this for about, I want to say 4 years. And last year, we put out a game called Bedlam Hall. Bedlam Hall is our quasi-horror terror Edwardian manners type of thing. The way I usually describe it is Downton Abbey meets the Addams Family in one game. So, yeah, and actually it's done very well in the fact that it has a niche that most people wouldn't have normally seen for horror-based RPGs. The big ones that most people who are familiar with are things like Call of Cthulhu, Vampire the Masquerade. But now it's a situation because of indie RPGs, you can start seeing things much more creatively. For instance, ours is Bedlam Hall. There's another great one called Monster Hearts, which plays up to the monsters in high school, kind of trying to determine one's identity. So it allows a lot of different types of exploration of the horror genre.
I've never even heard of Monster Heart either, so I'm going to have to look that up after we're done talking.
I actually did. I actually saw Master Prom and Master Hearts. It's combined to one another. It's like a bunch of people, like I believe 2 or 3 people could co-op in the game. And it's all about like standards and knowledge of like what the other like players like in the game will like fall in love with you, and like which one will choose you at prom night, comparing to like your set status points and things like that. So
a good example of that would be similar to like Buffy the Vampire Slayer TV series or True Blood, where there's a lot obviously the horror is there, but it also goes into the kind of relationships between the characters, and it actually is a really good exploration of some of the difficulties of being in high school, where you're trying to figure out who you are and what you believe in and what you're attracted to, on top of the fact you may be a vampire or you may be a zombie or you may be a werewolf, and so that just adds more complications to that pursuit.
Pretty much like which creature can work with another creature kind of thing, or which creature, yeah. Very clever. And I'm trying to think what I was gonna go with here. So your hall, Bedlam Hall, I noticed is a depression game for the horrible people, which that kind of is very odd slogan. Which when I was reading that, I'm just like, And so, I guess we'll get in a little bit more later on one of the questions anyway. But
Sure.
Your first question, though, David, is when you create your game, how long did it actually take you?
Actually, it's based off of, I want to say that in certain circumstances, it's been like lightning in a bottle, and other times it's taken a little bit longer in order to determine the flavor that I'm trying to capture. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So, our first game that we did as Monkeyfun Studios is a game called Spirit of 77, and it's based off of 1970s pop culture. And that one really wrote itself. It was very quick to write, to be able to figure out the core elements of it and what we wanted to put into the game. Bedlam Hall was a little different because it was an interesting idea, and I can talk about the inception of the idea, but also trying to determine the voice that we wanted to have for the game. You brought up the phrase, a depressing role-playing game for terrible people or horrible people. The reason that came about was that for a long time I knew kind of what I was wanting to have as the setting and what people were doing. But when you're writing a game, you also need to determine, or at least for myself, how you want to have that narrative to when you're providing information. I mean, you can do it very dry, and you can do it very matter-of-factly, but personally speaking, I write best when I'm wanting to have a specific voice to it. And I was not sure what I wanted to do until Netflix came out with a series of unfortunate events. And I was familiar with the book and seen the movie, and then the TV series came out. And then I realized that I really wanted to capture that flavor of not just talking about doomed people and crazy stuff and the dichotomy of what you're supposed to do as opposed to what's good for you, but also have that kind of tongue-in-cheek nihilism to every word that it was included. So, getting back to your original question, how long did Bedlam Hall take? I want to say Bedlam Hall took about a year. The core elements of it took about 5 months, but it took a while for me to figure out how I wanted it to sound in the words I was putting on the page.
Fair enough.
I'm sorry, I'm going all long answers and stuff like that.
No,
you're fine.
You're fine. It's just
You're being thorough.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
Thorough. That's another nice word for it. Chatty.
That's okay. I'm usually called the chatterbox of my family, so you're all good.
Okay.
Yeah, no, the reason why I'm saying, you're like, why we're saying we're fine too is because we were watching some YouTuber play your game anyway last night.
Okay.
And so what you were saying was like how it worked, who says what or whatever, and to go into the story and whatnot. It makes sense that you want to take your time too. So, and in your case, you probably have to play the scene a couple times anyway to know what you want to do, or who chooses to be where and stuff. Because that's one thing we noticed too sometimes is like. The guy was like, "Oh, where's the head maid or where's the cook or whatever," and then they gotta say like, "Oh, we're in the kitchen or something." So I don't know if that.
Oh yeah.
I can't think of a word right now, but like I don't know if that needs to be repeated. I guess like a couple times, like where like let's just say in one scene you're in the kitchen, but maybe in the next scene you're in the library or something. I don't know if that would make a big difference, but
yeah, for our game specifically, and it doesn't have to be that way. It's not inherent, but we don't go necessarily for maps and figures that you might see for something like Dungeons and Dragons. Although it has happened. A good buddy of mine, whenever he runs a game of Bedlam Hall, he actually brings out a clue board and puts it right there so everybody can see the house. And actually, one of the things we talk about is the players themselves spell out where the different rooms of the house would be as part of the game narrative. So what happens is that, sometimes it's very clear, and sometimes you have people saying, okay, I'm going to put the kitchen right next to the coal bin or whatever, and just make it really wacky. And that's fine. That's actually the best thing to do, because games like Bedlam Hall or other games that are what's called Powered by the Apocalypse are based off of a system called Apocalypse World by Vincent and Maggie Baker. And they make it very clear, as games powered by the Apocalypse, that the players need to be as invested in the narrative as the storyteller. We both collaborate and to build out what the overall game will be. So what happens is that you ask a lot of questions as a storyteller, as opposed to just making them react to things you're telling them. You ask them, okay, where are you at this scene? What are you doing? What's your goal in this? And you also get into deeper questions like why are you afraid of the Lord of the Manor? Why is his wife trying to kill him? What's lurking in the basement? So that way they actually are building it, and, as opposed to you just saying, this is what it is, that's what it is.
Awesome. Yeah, that was another thing too that we'll get into maybe. But we didn't happen to skip ahead of the video a little bit and hear like the guy that did your game 3 other times with 3 different groups, how this time this happened rather than this, and it was just cool because your game I guess has multiple ways of playing, which is very good playability or replayability. There it is. And so that right there kind of caught my attention. Like, oh, okay, so this isn't just one ending. There's possible ways of going depending on where you decide to go. Like, you brought up the basement. So, like, nobody actually went into the basement in the video that we went to. So, like that, it's cool to see, okay, well, next playthrough, I want to see what's in this basement kind of thing.
Sure, and actually, one of the things that we specify in what our adventures, which we call Terrible Tales, we make it very clear that the storyteller has options that they could potentially do. Because, again, it's collaborative, but also the storyteller should have the flexibility to go the direction that the players are leading towards. And what I mean that is, like, it could be a situation where, they want to do something that's very eldritch, very esoteric, otherworldly kind of threats out there. Or they just want to make it a situation where the family is, nuts, like arsenic and old lace or something to that effect, where they're somewhat psychotic. Or you can make it very tongue-in-cheek. You can make it very Addams Family-esque, where it's, a lighthearted kind of horror. So you really have the options for the adventures, and what we specify within the game is to know what your players are looking for, and if they're leading you towards one thing as opposed to another, go with it, and we try to give you as many tools to be able to get to that point.
What inspired you to make an RPG tabletop games?
This particular one, or just overall?
Overall.
I was exposed to RPGs very young, and I had played them, but I always say that my gateway game was never D&D. Actually, in junior high school, I believe, I was a really big fan of a system called Marvel Superheroes, and it's exactly what you think it is. It's the fact that you're playing a role-playing game with superheroes, and we created long, big universes for it. And I always kind of had that interest, I was very into, when, of course, Vampire the Masquerade came out in the 90s. I had my guy liner and wore a lot of black. So it was something always that I wanted to do, and it wasn't until we started doing Spirit of 77 that I realized this was something I really liked doing and found kind of a calling. And after Spirit, Bedlam Hall came up, because obviously, if you're doing a game about the 70s, the next thing you should do is a game about Downton Abbey and the Addams Family. And it was just where I wanted to go, and like to be able to explore different genres of different ideas.
Very nice.
So Sheila's question for you is, Bedlam Hall is made as a depressing game for horrible people. So how does it make someone like ourselves horribly depressed?
Oh, because, well, it's actually kind of an interesting thing in that one of the impetus for Bedlam Hall, outside of the overall genre, was a kind of an idea that I had, or a philosophy I had, which was, everybody's heard of, if you're into horror games, Call of Cthulhu, which is based off of the Lovecraft mythos, with Cthulhu and Nyarlathotep, and all that. And I was always saying that these types of games and genres were not accurate, because they always had people running towards the monsters, right? Or trying to solve it. And I have always, tongue-in-cheek said, I think most people would just try to finish their work day as opposed to wanting to solve the ancient riddle that may or may not, unleash the great terror from beyond. So the humor of it was the fact that the characters that everybody plays, or the players of the game, you aren't investigators. You are not the lead characters of what a normal horror story would be. Instead, you're the servants. So, because I always found in Downton Abbey that to be a much more entertaining group of people as opposed to the nobles. So it cracked me up to say, okay, these people are sitting there watching these horrible things happen, and they're more wrapped up on whether or not they're going to be able to get the linen folded, or whether or not they're going to be getting, the silverware cleaned up, or their job, or, all those kinds of things. And ultimately, it's the fact that, one, you are kind of horrible for not really caring about that. And two, it's also the depressing fact that, even though all these things are happening, you have a limited level of control over being able to stop it. So it's one of those jokes to say, this is a depressing game. There's no way to win this. And actually, that's kind of the joke of that fact that, the longer you play a Call of Cthulhu game, the more likely your character is going to go insane or die, or both. So it's just kind of how I feel like a lot of the horror games, unfold.
Nice. I thought it was kind of interesting just from first reading that, and I'm just like, okay, very clever. And then you read something about people being backstabbed and stuff, and there was something else too where you can survive the night, or everybody can die, which I thought was very cool and clever.
Yeah, one of the mechanics in the game is something called prestige, and what that means is that basically, I don't know how it is in your job, but your day job, but theoretically, for game purposes, people try to backstab each other to get, favor in the workplace. I don't know if you've seen this. So the point being is that the prestige allows people to be able to try to get ahead in their job, or the rankings amongst the staff and in the eyes of the family, while still trying to stay away from the trouble that happens within the house and with the family and the creatures all throughout it.
you might have already answered this, but if you maybe want to elaborate more, so how did you come up with the concept for a story of the game?
Actually, that's an excellent question. So, my wife and I were watching the final season of Downton Abbey, and I had kind of drifted away after the second season, and I got hooked back into it. And my wife said, you really ought to come up with a game based around Downton Abbey. And I thought, well, I don't know if I really have a hook for it. I don't know if, how I would do that. And we went off grocery shopping later that day, and in the frozen food aisle, because I remembered very clearly, I thought, well, what if they were doing it for somebody that was an axe murderer? Like, what if Lady Edith was killing her, her suitors? And I laughed. I just laughed, and just my mind started, working on that. And so the two, the dichotomy of saying, okay, we're going to have the prim and proper servants of Downton Abbey dealing with absolute nut jobs like Addams Family, Arsenic and Old Lace and all that. That is a funny idea to me. And so that's where I wanted the game to go. Mm-hmm. There's actually another series out from the BBC called Jeeves and Wooster. And it was based off of a series of novels by B.G. Wodehouse. And it stars Hugh Laurie from House and Stephen Fry from A Million Things. And basically, Hugh Laurie was playing the British gentleman, and Jeeves was his valet, and Jeeves is the smarter one of the two. So Wooster gets in trouble, doesn't know what to do, and is kind of a little dim-witted, and so Jeeves always has to get him out of the trouble that Wooster creates. And I thought that was a very interesting way of setting up a game, of having the players not be the ones that basically get themselves in trouble, but are somewhat obligated to either get their employers out of trouble, or at least find a way so it doesn't affect them personally.
Okay. As far as you saying you don't know about my daytime job, well, I receive packages to get them ready for the job, and then I ship at the end of the day. So I deal with a lot of daily BS sometimes. And,
Sure.
And then I have some people, which I won't say name, but they definitely try to get like somebody like me per se to help them get their job done so they can leave early, while
course.
I get to stay here and do everything else. So
So putting this into like Bedlam Hall perspective. Okay, so you're getting packages, right? You're going through it, and you find one, and you can hear in the package low growling.
Yep.
And there's no breathing holes in it, and every so often it moves, and you're put in that situation where I know this is probably a bad thing, but it's 5:00.
I gotta go.
Yeah, I'm gonna push this over. I didn't see any, or excuse me, Larry, come on over. Will you deal with this package while I go deal? Yeah, you deal with this one. That's you, man. Thank you. That's kind of like the mechanisms or the mechanics of what happens in Bedlam Hall. Of course, it's also one of those things where the box is just humming, going, "Get out, get out." Okay, I'm gonna let you deal with this one.
Or
I'm gonna go take a break.
Or I'll just throw it in there since as we're talking about this, it just reminded me of it. Or we can go with the monster from Creepshow, the crate.
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah. So yeah. Do we want to get eaten or do we want to stay alive? Like you said, it's 5:00. Where are you coming to deal with it?
Exactly.
So yeah, perfect.
One of the things, and I wanted to bring this up, was horror games really now in an interesting place because it's no longer just a scenario of rolling dice and seeing what happens. A buddy of mine, his name is Epadiah Revachol, he has a game called Dread. And Dread, the main mechanic is based off of a Jenga tower as opposed to rolling dice. So whenever your character is dealing with something that's risky, you pull a Jenga block. And so what happens is that if the tower falls, a character dies and flat out just dies. So what he did is that he used a different mechanism as opposed to just rolling dice to be able to instill that type of tension that's necessary for a horror game that you wouldn't normally have in something else. Another great game is a game called 10 Candles. And 10 Candles is exactly what you think it is. It's like all the players have 10 candles, like birthday candles or something like that. Or tea lights or whatever you want. But the point being is that those lights or candles represent your lifespan. So, it's one of those things that really you're at the end of the world, and when the darkness takes people over, they are gone. So
it blows out a candlelight.
Yeah, it's a very intense type of game to be involved in because more or less you have a limited lifespan in the game and there's nothing you can do about it. So it adds, because it's a candle, it burns out. So you really have that type of emotional investment in trying to do the most you can with the time that you have, which is something that horror games have always been, struggling with to say, how can you make it feel more like a movie or a book or something like that? And these types of new mechanisms allows the players to experience more tension than they would have before.
I'm gonna have to check out 10 Candles and the other one you were saying.
Dread.
Yes, that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But out of those two, which one would you recommend the most?
I don't know if I would recommend one or the other. I can say that...
Like, if I were to play one first, which one?
Probably Dread, because Dread's a little bit easier to kind of wrap your mind around, because, 10 Candles is a great game, and I totally recommend it, but it's also, it's like reading or watching the movie The Road, where you can, sure, you can watch it and, where it's going, but afterwards you kind of need an army blanket thrown over you and you kind of need a little cup of tea to feel a little bit better after everything you've experienced.
How exactly does the point system work? The Bedlam the mechanics.
Okay, sure. So, one of the things about games that are powered by the apocalypse is, and that's just kind of a catch-all term, you don't need Apocalypse World to play Bedlam Hall. But the mechanic is, if you, Sheila, say, I want to open this door, you don't need to roll dice to see whether or not you can open the door, because inherently you should be able to do that, right? It's only when things are contested or things are blocking you, or like you're trying to open the door before the man-eating tiger gets loose from its cage and comes down the hallway. That's when dice get rolled. And the system's really straightforward in that it's not a lot of dice. It's not like D20s or D4, 400s or something like that. It's 2 6-sided dice, straight up. So what happens is you roll them, and then if it's a 10 and above, it's a success. If it's a 6 and below, or below, it's a failure. A 7 to 9 is a partial success. And what I mean by that is you either are partially successful or it's success at a cost. For instance, going back to our initial example, so rolling the dice to see whether or not you can open the door in time before the man-eating tiger gets to you. If you have a partial success, it's you're able to partially open the door, or you open the door and you're able to get in, but then you realize there's something inside the room that you may not want to have to face that makes it just as complicated then as opposed to being attacked by the tiger. But at least you are not being attacked by the tiger at this time. Make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's actually a very straightforward system that makes it a lot easier for people new to RPGs to be able to embrace. Instead, because it doesn't really want to base itself off of mechanics, it wants to base it off of more of you being an active participant in the game in terms of how it's developing.
So going back to that partial thing too, real quick. So
Sure.
Can that also act in a way of like, let's say you got that door partially open, but then that tiger either gnawed off your arm or like scratched you or something?
Yeah, sure. And actually, yeah, but you survived and you
Right.
got through, right?
Right.
So, and that's really the basis of it in terms of like the mechanics. There's also elements of it saying, okay, like if you, one of the things we have is a move called Ignore the Strange, which is basically you being able to kind of willpower your way through something out of the ordinary that's a little bit dark. So you would add what's called your composure to be able to move beyond it and to focus on your actions. So most of these games, as I said, are intended to be very light in terms of that. So you don't have to sit there and spend an entire evening doing nothing but rolling dice for one particular scene, which can sometimes happen if you're in a very rule and mechanic intensive game.
Like Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh, there's much more complicated than that. Oh, much more. I'm trying to think of one that hero can be the hero system can be very long,
Yeah.
but some people like that and that's cool. Some people like what's in game parlance called crunch. So some people like crunch, that's great. But story games like this, games powered by Apocalypse or another system called Fate or something like that, they're intended to be driven by the narrative, by the player interactions and the overall story.
What inspired the characters for the game?
A couple of different things.
Oh, do tell.
Well, like I said, I really like the idea of having the Downton Abbey characters thrown up against terrible things. Again, Jeeves and Wooster was part of the influence. I really liked the idea of having maids involved in the game, specifically because in every horror genre TV or film, there's a moment where the maid gets threatened, and so the maid screams and becomes a mess, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the strengths of the maid character, where basically you have an ability, you have the abilities which are called moves, which allow you to be able to do certain things at certain times. So what happens is that the maid, at any given moment, when faced with a really terrible thing about to happen, can start breaking down and start crying uncontrollably. And with success at that, whatever's about to attack you turns its attention to something else, which is, more or less turning that cliche into a strength for the maid to be able to do.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, kind of reminds me now of the old show that I used to watch with my grandparents and my parents back when I was little, like the Munters, where you saw
Yes.
the Munters versus like the normal people that walk into their home kind of thing. It's perfect. So it just reminds me of that sometimes. The consequences of some of them, and including the boyfriend of Munter's daughter or whatever she
Marilyn?
was. Yeah. Those were some of my favorite scenes anyway.
A town called Malice
Yes.
is your upcoming RPG. What can you tell us about the game?
Sure. Malice is a new game that we're working on, that we're planning to do the Kickstarter in early of 2019. And one of the influences for that is I got hooked on what's called Nordic noir TV series and films. Things like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Wallander. Netflix has a great series called Dark, if you've caught that. And also Amazon Prime has a series called Fortitude. And couple that with Twin Peaks, it was an idea of saying, let's make a game that's based off of small towns having to face, darknesses that are affecting them while they're still having to kind of get over their own relationship issues. One of the things I really liked about Twin Peaks is Twin Peaks was not just about the death of Laura Palmer, or although that was really what was driving, the initial spark of the plot line. But everything else was like the reactions between everybody in relationships, some good, some bad. They couldn't necessarily get over certain things. While in the woods, there was still the darkness of the spirit Bob and the Black Lodge. So there were things beyond their control. So I really liked the idea of taking those things, like the Nordic noir kind of bleakness of the isolated town, and being able to say we're going to include creatures in there, things like 30 Days of Night, where vampires come in and are threatening people. Things like, actually, a really great one is Jaws, strangely enough, because here's a small town being threatened by something that they cannot control. And so far, the game has been going very well in its playtesting, and we think it'll probably do very well during the Kickstarter as well.
Nice. And speaking of the Nordic and stuff, is by chance the town called Malice inspired by any actual true events at all, or any specific location?
Actually, that's a very interesting question. When I first, I'm currently in Los Angeles, and I grew up in LA. But right after college, I moved up to the Pacific Northwest, and it was not directly to like one of the bigger cities. It was Portland, like Portland or Seattle or anything like Tacoma or something like that. It was actually a very small town outside of Portland called Washougal. And Washougal's a very small, or at least at the time it was. It's actually gotten a lot bigger now, but small town, which was real culture shock for me, comparatively speaking. And so it was, quite a sobering kind of thing to be in a small town after being in the metropolis of LA. And there's a lot of, out in the Northwest, there are certain areas of just the state, specifically Washington, where you go, yep, right here is, where the Green River Killer was, or this particular area is, Ted Bundy country, and so it's that kind of concept where, these kinds of areas, because they're remote, they have their own kind of secrets associated with it, and they're kind of, they can be a little foreboding, for people who haven't grown up there, and it's just kind of an odd experience compared to how I felt when I was living in Los Angeles.
Well, try coming over here to the Northeast where we are. Nothing but green in some city, and then you got
more green.
Oh yeah.
So,
Unless you go to New York and then you're surrounded by buildings and no green whatsoever.
Industrial.
Oh yeah, actually, that's funny that you say that, because my wife and I, we met in New York City, and we had decided that we were going to go to a Ren fair, a Renaissance fair, and so we rented a car and we got directions, and we started driving, and then as we were going into the state, in New York State, we were getting exactly what you're talking about. You're getting into more green area, and it was not 20 minutes outside of the city where you realized how rural it could be. And for a while, I was working in New Jersey, and occasionally I would have to go out into beyond Jersey City. So what would happen is that you're used to being in New York and Jersey, and then as you go in, you understand why it's the Garden State, because you see that it's very lush and it's very green and it's very quiet, and that quiet is something that it has a lot of potential for some very interesting interactions for players and for games that I don't think really gets treated with the kind of attention it can really warrant, I think.
Yeah, I mean, really anything really needs a lot of attention anyway, and otherwise it could probably become more, for I guess lack of a better word, and is like crowded, I guess.
Yeah, one of the, getting back to David Lynch a little bit, so one of the things about the movie Blue Velvet, right, is that Blue Velvet starts off with the main character in his very suburb world where he was visiting from college, and he ran into his high school sweetheart and what have you. And then just underneath the surface is when he realized that there was a lot of, corruption and dark people and strange things that he never knew just existed just underneath the surface. And I think that's really an interesting way of creating games, or a genre for games, which is what I'm really wanting to explore with Malice.
Now, have you? I'm not since I'm not familiar with you at all. Have you done any like add-ons to your games at all, or any
Yes.
type of adaptions? I think.
Well, let's see. So for the first one which we did, which was Spirit of 77, we have a full line. And again, that's not a horror series, but just to talk about it, to answer your question. So we have several books out. We have several adventures. We also have, as I said, for Bedlam Hall, multiple adventures called Terrible Tales. And one of the Terrible Tales is called A Continuation of Horrible Events, which is kind of a parody of a series of unfortunate events. So it was me kind of doing my own spin on what that would be like.
Because I was doing some more research too, and I know on the site that your games are on, it's like $25 for the physical copy or something like that. I saw.
Actually, yeah. So that's a nice little segue. So one of the things, and getting back to how the genre has changed, is because it's no longer just a physical medium. It's a lot easier for people to be or to try out new things. So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to reach out and purchase $200 worth of physical books, I can go online, and the site you're talking about, I believe, is probably Drive-Thru RPG. Yeah. So Drive-Thru has that option, but if you're saying, I want to experiment and just kind of see this, it's possible to download an electronic PDF for half the price or even less to just kind of get a sense of what the game is like, and people do that quite a bit to be able to invest in or to investigate something new, and then if they want to embrace it a little bit more, they can get the physical copy or just play it with the electronic. That's fine. So it's now a scenario that you don't necessarily even have to have a printed version of your game in order to make it something interesting to other people or to available to other people.
Yep. And right now, I believe, I don't know how long it's going for, but I'm pretty sure I saw that Bedlam Hall is actually on sale right now. The digital version, anyway, for like $10. Did I see that right?
Yes, I think so. Actually, what's kind of interesting is that we just finished up a recent sale that we were doing through a group called Bundle of Holding. Bundle of Holding, what they do is that they reach out to different RPG groups, and it's exactly what it is. It's a electronic bundle of multiple titles that people would not necessarily get, but in order to try a lot of different things.
So,
and not only is that good for the publisher, but they also do like a percentage to a local charity. Like ours was, I believe, Doctors Without Borders.
all right, so I'm going to stop you for a second. So that reminds me of Humble Bundle. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I have, actually.
Okay, so that's what this sounds like, if I'm correct.
Yeah, and the games that we were actually put up or put together with was from a group called Magpie. And Magpie did a really interesting game last year called Bluebeard's Bride. And Bluebeard's Bride was fascinating in the fact that all of the players are playing manifestations of the personalities of the bride of Bluebeard. The nurse, or not nursery time, but the story serial killer. And so all of the players are playing different aspects of her as they're trying to determine what's going to happen at the end of the game. So we were very proud to be part of it. It's a very fresh perspective that you wouldn't normally have had. And it's a beautiful book. Might add, it's gorgeous.
I'll have to check it out then too.
Sure.
I'm gonna have to go back while editing this and like write down every name and be like, okay, I wanted to check out this one, and everybody listening to do the same thing.
You mentioned it plays out with modern horror movies and books. In what way?
One of the things that, because I was into the genre for a while, I was seeing lots of specific archetypes that people or that would always pop up in this series. So one thing I liked was the concept of the stranger. So basically everybody at the table takes a role of what would be happening in the town. So the stranger for Twin Peaks would obviously be Agent Cooper. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. The Law, it would be the character that would be played by Michael Keane in Twin Peaks. But in Jaws, getting back to that, that's Roy Scheider's character. And actually the stranger in Jaws is a character played by Richard Dreyfuss, Hooper, coming in outside of it. So the idea was there's a lot of recurring themes and character types that I wanted to be able to have and have people develop that particular role. One of the things that I specify is that you aren't necessarily a good person or a bad person. You could potentially, and you could have relationships with the people at the table based off of, not off of who you are. To explain what I mean is, you could be one character be the sheriff and the other person be the local criminal, but you can still get along just fine, right? You don't necessarily have to have a bad relationship just because you're on the other sides of the law. If anything, you may have a better relationship because you understand one another. I wanted to have something where you could potentially have characters like Twin Peaks or something like Fortitude or something where you know what kind of character you could be, but what are you wanting to be is the question.
And that's where I say, honey, don't worry. I know that you're a serial killer and I'm a sheriff, but don't you worry. I completely understand why you're doing it.
Actually, that's funny
thank
you
you
say
for
that.
Understanding, darling.
So Malice actually is based off of a system called the Story Pillar system. Story Pillar system was originated by a buddy of mine who runs Protagonist Industries for his book Home by Dark, which is 1980s kind of kids on bikes type of like Spielberg kinds of series, E.T., Flight of the Navigator. So one of the aspects of it is that everyone at the table has relationships with one another. And so you may have a good relationship with one person who may not have a good relationship with you in reciprocated. So that can actually play out in a lot of different interesting ways. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you hate one another. For instance, a character, one example in the actual book is one character may have helped another character cover up a hit and run, right? So even though one character did that, because of trying to help them in a good relationship, the other person obviously has that guilt of it, and also the fact this other person knows their secret. So that puts a strain on that relationship. And again, all of this is in contrast to the darkness that is actually threatening the town.
I'll have to pay attention for next year then for this town of Malice. A town called Malice. I need to get it right. So, is there anything else that we didn't get to, David, about a town called Malice that you would like to talk about? Because that was the last question that we had for a town called Malice, since we didn't know so much about what we could talk about. So, I'm going to let you...
Malice is a little different. One of the things that... I'm personally known for as a game designer is to do kinds of interesting mashups and clever ideas of, as I said, our first game was based off of 1970s stuff. So it was like $6 Million Man meets Smokey and the Bandit, Rockford Files, Ziggy Stardust, all that kind of thing, which most people wouldn't normally put together. But when they got all together, everybody said, of course, that works. Bedlam Hall, as I said, was kind of a little tongue-in-cheek, a little bit kind of looking away from the horror kind of thing. But Malice is a lot different in that it emphasizes things that I don't normally bake into my game genres, where it's something where it's not just secrets that you have, but it also plays up on regrets that people have about how your relationship is based off of a longer history than you normally would see in a game, but would be in real life. And I'm really excited about it because I think that it explores a lot of different themes than I've personally put into games before. And actually, just to kind of, put a nice little bow on it. So if you are interested in Bedlam Hall or a town called Malice or Spirit 77, of course, we have our website, monkeyfunstudios.com. And, of course, we're on Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus and Instagram and a whole bunch of things. And we're keeping our progress on the game development for a town called Malice up to date on the blog on our website. So definitely keep an eye on that to see where we're at in any given time.
Well, I like that. I'm trying to think because I saw something earlier, and I believe it was you. I forget who it was, but did you happen to share something or upload something maybe on YouTube or something?
Yeah.
What was it called? It was
a teaser.
No, I saw that. I saw that. In fact, that you had a teaser for a town called Malice, but then there was another thing I saw where. I'm trying to figure out if it is you, so you'll have to correct me, but did you post something called Goss as Fuck?
Wow, I didn't. You did do some research. So, one of the things that we did as part of our Kickstarter for Bedlam Hall is that we had what was called a challenge coin. Challenge coins are more known in the military and service organizations that are traded in between people, to designate, services or tours of duty that you've done, like if you were in a particular location in the military. And I really like them. They're very cool. And I wanted to make one for the actual campaign for certain people. And one of the things that we did is that we had people purchase them, but we also wanted them to continue to carry them. So what we do for local conventions is that whenever we have like a booth or a table in a dealer's room, when people come over with their challenge coins, we actually have little pamphlet RPGs. And what they are is exactly that. They're just a pamphlet where it's like an 8.5 by 11 folded up, and of different concepts. And actually, it's based off of the what was done with a game called Lasers and Feelings, which is basically a one-page RPG done by John Harper, who did the most recent game, Blades in the Dark. And so I needed 2 pages, so I put it on the same page, or the same piece of paper. So Goth as Fuck was the first one that we did, where basically everybody at the table is being part of a goth clique at a goth club. And so basically you're trying to be catty towards everyone else. Again, this goes back to my guy liner days, in the 90s. But it's meant also not just to be kind of like a little bit of poking fun at it, but it's also one of those things that I love goth music, so I knew what I wanted to have in it. So yeah, there is a video for that particular pamphlet RPG. And we also did another one called Mars Hates Homework, which was intended to be our take on Invader Zim.
Love that show. Love that show.
Yeah. And what's kind of cool about these little pamphlet RPGs is that you can download them from Drive-Thru RPG as well, and they're only $1.99. So you download it, you print it up, and you got a game for 2 hours, and it's not very complicated. It's the kind of thing that you do whenever you bring everybody over for like a Friday night, and what are we gonna do tonight? Hey, let's play Goth as Fuck, or why don't we play Mars Hates Homework, and then boom,
Nice.
It fits in real life. Yeah, it's a nice takeaway, and again, it's something that we tried to do to be able to show our appreciation for the people who supported Bedlam Hall when we were doing the Kickstarter.
That's awesome. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm surprised I didn't add this question into the thing, but probably because I was just thinking what could we talk about? So, and this is going to be for overall. So how many players for minimum and maximum are your games?
Usually you need a minimum of 3. However, I have known situations where people have played Spirit of 77 and Bedlam Hall with 2, where it was just the storyteller and the player. I personally recommend 3, because that way you have a little bit of player interaction, and also a little bit of conflict between that, in that scenario. Maximum is one of those things, it's a question of the comfort level of the table. I'm personally infamous for running games, at least at game conventions, large tables of 6 or 7. That's a lot of people. And I think most people would probably feel more comfortable with a table of 5 players, and so a total of 6. When you're playing, and this is talking less about game design and more about running games, when you are playing or running a table of 7 players, it's important for the storyteller or the game master to step away from narrating too much, because what happens is that you ultimately are narrating for one person or one group of people, because invariably the party splits. It's just part of what happens. So what you want to do is try to make sure that everybody gets a little bit of the spotlight, everybody is brought together as often as possible, and you encourage them to basically interact with one another, even if it's in conflict, so that way you're not ignoring anybody or leaving anybody out, and that way they're driving the game more than you need to.
You guys think we covered it all now?
Yeah, I think we covered it all, honestly.
Alrighty.
And I think David did an amazing job explaining it all. Being
Thank
chatty and all.
Chatty people unite!
Yes. Sweet.
Speaking of chatty people, so real quick, David, did your cat ever finish that cigarette, and did he not go over and turn a gas knob?
She was actually pretty good. You know, every so often we have to let her have a, you know, smoke a cigarette because, you know, she doesn't, you know, she's a roommate mostly. You know, we see each other. I leave her alone. You know, she sometimes comes in the room, asks if I'm going to eat that. Go, yeah, that's fine, and she leaves. No, but she's fine.
Awesome. At least nobody had to get burned to the ground today.
Yeah, well, who knows tomorrow?
Oh boy.
Oh boy. You'll have to keep us posted.
Keep a fire extinguisher handy.
Well, you know, you can't get between a cat and her cigarettes, I've learned.
Well, awesome. So, David, real quick, I know you already said it again, but we'll just say it one more time. So, if anybody wants to keep up with you, especially for your...
Monkeyfunstudios.com and Facebook, Monkeyfun Studios. Twitter is Monkeyfun Studio, because we couldn't get it all in. But you just search for it and you'll find us. And we're also on Instagram and Google+.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to have all your links in the description below, so that way people can just click on it all.
Cool.
And everything else. So your upcoming game, A Town Called Malice, is expected early.
Early next year? Yep.
Yep. All right. Awesome. And so if anybody wants to know, go to Kickstarter, okay? And this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna type in Monkeyfun Studio, and Monkeyfun, by the way, is one word for people that did not know. And what you do on Kickstarter is once you find David here, or Monkeyfun Studio, depending on how it's come up, you click on the profile and you hit that follow button. Because as soon as A Town Called Malice goes live, you will get that email and you can start pledging right away. And that would be the best thing to do. So, yay! Yeah, so thank you so much, David.
It was
Thank
definitely
you for having me. Appreciate it.
definitely a pleasure, David.
And
Thank you very much. I'm glad we were able to get past the technical difficulties we were having there.
yeah, I don't know what the hell's going on with Skype, but I tried calling you and it just like said it was trying to connect, and then it like goes call ended. So
It was weird. The public directory wasn't even listing. It's not coming up. Going, what the heck, you know? Because I saw it like 2 days. Your Skype identity 2 days ago. I'm thinking, oh, no problem, we're good. But
yeah,
today was a long day.
that's why, like, I don't know, for future reference, I do it anyway for people who I interview. I find them anyway, but in your case, I didn't know, you weren't coming up either, so, what I usually do, once I find the person, I'll send a message, be like, hey, this is us, see you soon, or whatever, so that way it automatically puts you into the contacts of them.
Yeah.
So I probably should have done that too, but oops.
We made it work.
Yes. So David, thank you so much again. Definitely a pleasure having you on, and you are more than welcome to come back on anytime.
Thank you.
Maybe when A Town Called Malice comes out, we can talk about how the malice of the game came to be, and why Tessa and I are arguing about the game or something. I don't know.
You got it.
But yeah, David, thank you so much again, and for everybody, make sure you go and just make sure you update everything, and that will be good.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a pleasure, David, definitely. And we can't wait to talk to you again about any further projects that you have.
Stay
scary.